Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar, Think Beyond Traditional DevOps, Automate with Jobs as Code, hosted by Enterprise Management Associates and BMC Software. We've got some exciting things to talk about today, and here to get that started, we have Julie Craig, Research Director at EMA, and then we'll have Tina Sturgis, Solutions Marketing Director here at BMC Software. You will notice during the webinar there's a section below for Q&A. Please feel free to type in any questions that you might have, and we will be sure to get those answered at the end of the webinar. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Julie.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event. My portion of the presentation will address DevOps, continuous delivery, and the digital enterprise. I'll also talk about the automation supporting these topics in context to the idea of shifting left in terms of the underlying tasks supporting application delivery. Shifting left is a relatively recent idea that's gaining industry momentum. Now, just to note, the material I present today is all drawn from my latest survey-based research into DevOps and continuous delivery, which I conducted in April of this year. More information on this study for anyone who's interested is available at the Enterprise Management site at www.emausa.com. As you'll see, DevOps practices have become critical to digital business, and the agility introduced by software-driven automation has become an essential element in improving collaborations between dev and ops organizations. So I'm going to start out talking about DevOps, continuous delivery, and the digital enterprise. These days, it seems as if everyone is talking about DevOps and continuous delivery. It's also clear that these industry buzzwords are still gaining momentum. So even though they've been around a while, we're still hearing a lot about these topics. All of my research points to the fact that there really is value in changing the way IT delivers and supports its services. At the same time, much of the discussion around DevOps in particular has been on the development side. Too often, operations is left largely out of the loop for a major portion of the application lifecycle. To maximize usage of personnel and tools, however, it's important to recognize the impact of DevOps practices on both development and operations, since DevOps can and often does span the entire application lifecycle. So to start off, what are DevOps and continuous delivery, and how do they support the digital business? Well, my research is showing that today, almost all companies think of themselves as digital businesses, and both DevOps and continuous delivery are enablers for the digital revolution. That's because in this context, the word digital is almost synonymous with software-driven. Business success lies in the ability of a company to rapidly develop and deliver new features that appeal to consumers and business leaders. At the same time, the software delivered must also be tested, proven, and of high quality. To support these objectives, many IT organizations are utilizing agile development practices to support continuous delivery of software code. In this scenario, software is delivered more frequently and in smaller increments than it was with the delivery practices of the past. The DevOps function goes hand in hand with continuous deliveries. Now, DevOps teams go by different names in different companies. Some call them infrastructure services or application support instead of DevOps. Regardless, most IT organizations today, almost 90%, have formed teams of senior personnel with cross-functional dev and ops skill sets. These groups have a mandate to work collaboratively to support application delivery at multiple stages of the life cycle. So I mentioned that DevOps and continuous delivery go hand in hand, and this slide supports that idea. Many digital businesses are investing heavily in automation supporting software delivery at scale. As you see here, lists of technology-related digital objectives for the coming year are topped by automation, supporting continuous delivery, along with improved collaboration across IT silos. Automation enabling DevOps personnel to seamlessly collaborate despite wide differences in their skill sets and skill languages are in high demand today. They're also becoming generally recognized not only as IT tools, but also as key digital investments. In other words, both automation and cross-functional collaboration have become hallmarks of high-performing IT organizations, and the need for both becomes increasingly critical as application ecosystems become increasingly complex and as rapid change becomes more commonplace. Now, this graphic is the graphic I usually use when I talk about DevOps and continuous delivery in relation to automation. It may be different to others that you may have seen because it shows automation as the core of these processes. With software increasingly becoming a critical success factor underlying digital business, DevOps practices can build a seamless foundation that can grease the wheels for continuous delivery and for smooth operation of IT applications that are delivered to the business. Multiple tools across each stage of the life cycle can feed a physical or logical data hub that acts as an information repository supporting cross-lifecycle collaboration. Such a hub provides the visibility to the steps and processes underlying application delivery, which have become critical to DevOps collaborations. Ideally, DevOps-focused automation facilitates collaboration across every stage of the life cycle. And not coincidentally, every year, a growing number of companies extend the reach of their DevOps teams. Today, DevOps practices are leveraged in every stage of the application lifecycle to a greater or lesser degree in approximately 1/4 of the companies that I survey. So I know I've focused heavily on software delivery and the DevOps aspect and continuous delivery aspect of delivering services to the business. But the truth of the matter is that the role of any organizational silo, whether it's the network team, the server team, the data center team, or the DevOps team, all of these teams are working in context to play their parts in delivering applications to the business. DevOps assumes a central role in this process, as this slide demonstrates. Here, the blue bars represent companies increasing revenue by 50% or more during 2016. So these findings are from earlier this spring, and they're in relation to last year's revenue. The green bars represent those with revenue growth less than 50%, flat growth, or decreased growth. So when you cross the numbers on revenue growth with respondent ratings on the quality of the interactions between Dev and Ops at their organizations, you see some valuable relationships between the two. Those ranking the interactions as excellent were 3 times as likely to grow revenue by 50% or more than those with lower quality interactions. These findings, which have been consistent across 3 separate surveys over the past 6 years, by the way, continue to support the fact that high-quality DevOps practices don't just benefit IT, they also have the potential to drive business revenue growth. So now let's spend a few minutes drilling down into the automation side of the life cycle. So many DevOps-related tasks can be automated, and this is true across virtually every stage of the life cycle. For example, many companies have invested in workload automation and application business automation products that can considerably streamline the tasks associated with day-to-day data center operations and with application delivery. Such automation is central to DevOps processes for multiple reasons. It improves operational efficiency, helps mitigate the impact of ongoing production change caused by continuous delivery, and frees up IT professionals for higher-level value-add work. Unfortunately, the current level of DevOps-focused automation in most companies is still relatively low. For the vast majority, the overall process is substantially under-automated. Only 6% of the companies I surveyed have automated between 90 and 100% of the processes supported by DevOps teams, and only about 20% have automated between 30 and 40% of the end-to-end process. So for most companies, such automation investments are still ongoing. However, these IT organizations are seeing DevOps and continuous delivery as data-driven continuums. This slide highlights the fact that the ability to share data and metrics across tools and lifecycle stages has grown in importance during the past 2 years. It reinforces the importance of DevOps and continuous delivery to the digital business, while linking them together with cross-tool integrations such as those I've described. Often, workload automation and application business automation products can play a key role in this process, since the job orchestration capabilities within such products help document and sequence multiple automated processes across a broad range of automated tools. So with this background, the discussion can move on to another key message of today's event, which is the idea of shifting left. This is a relatively new industry concept associated with the notion of moving procedural tasks earlier in the life cycle to ensure optimal efficiency of both dev and ops teams. Let's start by talking for a moment about workload automation and its DevOps-related challenges. With traditional workload automation solutions, operations teams have almost exclusive access to the platform. They interact with the product via a graphical user interface or a GUI. This type of access simplifies the process of running standard workloads, particularly when those workloads are tested, predictable, and normally error-free. However, there are multiple problems with this approach as DevOps practices mature. Often, development teams have little or no access to workload automation platforms, so they may be running scripts that have to be written to support the jobs and the applications they've created, but they can't actually test them. Another problem is that scripts in use tend to grow over time and become megascripts. As these megascripts grow larger and more complex, it's often the case that no one person is exactly sure of what's actually happening under the covers of the automation product. To complicate matters, when problems occur during the run, operations specialists are typically responsible for troubleshooting and for creating or modifying scripts to address the problem. This takes time out of their schedule and can also extend processing time for other scheduled jobs. In other words, impact the business in non-optimal ways. Many companies are seeking better ways to maximize the time and skills of both dev and ops specialists. One way to do this is by providing development with code-based access to automation platforms. This is what the concept of shifting left is all about. We're hearing the shift left concept being applied to a broad number of development and operations-related tasks. The basic idea is that tasks typically performed late in the life cycle can be shifted to earlier stages. The concept is often applied to software development, for example, where testing earlier in the life cycle ensures that code issues can be detected and remedied early before software is actually turned over to production support. The jobs as code concept, which you'll hear more about in a few minutes, supports shifting left and reflects the industry's embrace of software-defined systems, which you've probably heard applied to things like networks, virtual systems, and that sort of thing. Defining processes, tasks, and execution environments and configurations in a software-based versus hard-coded manner improves agility by enabling systems to be configured, deployed, or modified very rapidly via software versus by more traditional methods. So BMC has now built the shift left and jobs as code concepts into its Control-M solution. Control-M commands, as well as entire job streams, can be accessible via code. Job runs can now be specified and tested by developers as part of a normal application coding process. They can use their own familiar tool sets to bypass scripting and build specifications directly into code packages. These same capabilities give developers access to Control-M tasks, which could previously be done only by authorized operations users. They can bypass the Control-M graphical interface and create job runs using code instead. In a few minutes, Tina's going to give you more information on these new capabilities and how they impact DevOps practices. So, in summary, companies involved in digital business, and most are these days, require new and better ways to deliver and support software applications. The embrace of DevOps practices is one manifestation of this requirement, and both high-quality DevOps practices and accelerated continuous delivery help drive exceptional revenue growth. Automation plays a key role in this process. In addition, both shifting left and jobs as code maximize the value proposition of highly trained IT personnel, while also supporting high-quality DevOps practices. So this concludes my portion of today's presentation, and at this event, I'd like to turn the event back over to Tina at BMC. Tina?
Excellent. Thanks so much, Julie. Really good research. I urge everyone on the call to go ahead and take a look at the research that Julie has done on DevOps and continuous delivery. And we also, kind of leading into what is jobs as code and the solution that we have here at BMC Software, Julie also has written a impact note on that as well, and we'll give you that information here in a little bit to access that too. So let me go through. I only have a few slides. I'm not going to take too much time here. But again, let's talk about how we implement this change or shift in approach with jobs as code. So basically what we're talking about here is really changing and leveraging a tool set. We're leveraging some automation with that tool set within Control-M, as well as changing the way that we actually manage the process. And obviously that changes culturally, some of how people work together, etc. So the best way to describe it from our standpoint, when you actually begin to implement it using a tool and changing that process sort of all at the same time, I do it in a way where I kind of give you a before and after shot. So we have traditional job and workload scheduling automation process. So what happens there? So along the bottom, you'll see our traditional, software development lifecycle with plan, code, build, test, etc. And we also have X and Y axis where we have the effort spent on the scheduling as well as overtime, what happens over time within the SDLC. So as I click through and build this slide, what you see is obviously the effort spent goes up as you go through the SDLC here. And in traditional job and workload scheduling, we've always known that there has been some, kind of what we call speed bumps along the way. Developers will create a manual script, or perhaps they're using some open source tool, and kind of expanding the true nature of what that open source tool was supposed to be doing to help accommodate and define job and workload scheduling automation. And that typically comes through, and it's, a bit of, maybe the developer capacity is a little bit, higher to do that, etc. So moving through the process, you have the manual script, and then we go into the testing phase. And what happens is a lot of times what we find is that manual script that was created very early on in the SDLC actually doesn't reflect or replicate what's going to really happen in production. Testing occurs on it, and it passes all the tests that we normally have, but as we go through, what we find is that when we go into the release and deploy phase and the code is then turned over to the operations organization to push that into production, rework is increased. Basically what happens at this point is that, perhaps the operations team says, hey, this is not going to scale based on what we know, the volume of transactions in this application, it's not going to scale. So what they'll do is they'll actually rework it and move it forward into the production world. Now, a lot of times what happens in that case is, because we're at the tail end and we've sort of essentially halted the application delivery, testing sometimes isn't as robust as we would like it to be, if at all. So maybe we test it really quickly and we say, okay, we think it's good to go. But what we run in production, we actually may have issues down the road because of that late SDLC testing, and we probably haven't tested it to its fullest extent. And then you see that we have these delays. So this is what traditionally happens. We have these speed bumps that we hit along the road. The point is that when we move into a more agile and more DevOps type organizations and applications, what happens to this SDLC process? Well, we all know it's speed, and we want to increase that speed. So for instance, what we've kind of done from an analogy standpoint is a car running over the speed bumps, right? So if you think about it, if you run over a speed bump at 10 miles an hour, it's okay. It's fine, maybe a little annoying, but, you kind of get through it and, life is still good. But what happens when you increase that to, perhaps 45 miles an hour? Everybody within the DevOps world wants to increase speed, increase or maintain quality at a minimum, and accelerate that delivery of the application. So when you increase that speed, those speed bumps now are taken at a harder hit, right? So that's why this process and revamping this process is important to think about when you're moving forward, because it's actually a fairly easy thing to do from an automation standpoint. So this is shifting left with jobs as code. So what does that really mean? So we bring the ability for the developer to code in a simple notation using JSON, where they can go in an environment they're very comfortable in, and they can actually begin to code and define those job schedules for automation. So it becomes pretty easy. We go through, the developers then can focus in on some of its business value as opposed to worrying about manual scripts or maybe customizing those open source tools to accommodate this automation. Well, we then figure out that when we go into the testing phase, it now is much easier because we have a better production-like system that we can accommodate. The bonus of including the job definitions or workload definitions into the code itself is it gets checked in and checked out of the source control management system and the build management system that is in existence. We integrate right into that, and now it becomes part of that artifact of the application within the code base itself. What we find within our customers is our customers love the fact that they now can find those jobs and workload schedules right within the code. And sometimes, admittedly, they have found that, what may take them a few weeks to find, to make a change into the workload schedule or the job schedule, they actually can do in a matter of minutes as opposed to weeks. So that's a tremendous amount of time savings on their part. We have the higher quality code with better dry run testing is done with doing it with the shift left notion. And then it obviously reduces the rework as the handoff goes into operations and pushing into production. We have reduction of risk of failures in production and accelerating any recoveries if we needed them. So that's what shifting left with jobs as code essentially looks like. And you can also see from a standpoint where the orange line is versus the sort of aqua or teal line is, that the effort spent on scheduling actually becomes a little bit more flat as opposed to that curve up and to the right that you see here over time in the SDLC. So again, the effort is greatly reduced leveraging this jobs as code approach. Control M is the solution that we have at BMC that allows you the ability to do the coding right within the code itself using the JSON code notation. Additionally, we have removing the speed bumps by adopting jobs as code with Control M. So let's talk about some of those benefits where we have inherent scalability. It's built right in, so again, better tested, it's easier to scale, but more of a production-like system is being tested earlier on. And we all know that when we test early and we test often, it's way less expensive to fix the problem earlier on in the SDLC than it is further downstream when we're ready to go into production. Dev to ops harmony, this is one benefit that I actually really appreciate, and I think I saw a question come through there because one of the biggest challenges that folks have in doing DevOps and rolling out a DevOps foundation, no matter what process you're trying to DevOps, is how do you increase the collaboration between what is typically siloed. So dev and ops typically are siloed. They don't usually talk to one another. They have different priorities. And honestly, they're even compensated differently. Dev is compensated to get the application done faster. Operations is obviously compensated in a way that, they have less defects rolling out into production and less downtime. So we all know that they're worried about their SLAs and they want to manage and they get compensated by which. So when you have the jobs as code approach with the Control M solution, what happens is now devs, because they can code it in an environment that they are very naturally in the code, as opposed to having to go into a GUI interface that would be seen by the operations team. You now begin to get this understanding. Development begins to understand why operations would halt them with certain things, and operations sees that development, hey, these are our needs for this particular workload schedule automation. Within this process. So it becomes this very harmonious world we live in, and it becomes a byproduct of just using the different sort of, for lack of a better term, interfaces of the Control-M solution, within the code and in a GUI interface, that everybody's sort of happy and they begin to understand what one another needs and wants. And then obviously we have the future-proof, so you're always going to have this. I mean, I know it sounds really simple, but what if your developer who created a manual script in the traditional world, happens to get moved off that particular application onto another? What happens when that system needs to be changed and that job schedule needs to change? Well, a lot of time is spent being, what happened? How do I find out? Where's the documentation? We know in the Agile world we're not supposed to document. We're just supposed to kind of go. We have our stories, we have our epics, and we have all of the things that we have when we have our backlog of things that we're working on. So documentation isn't huge like it was back in the waterfall days. So what this allows them to do is really get a quick glance in the code to that job schedule and edit it and then move on and push it through to production. So our customers are seeing a lot of value within here really accelerating what they're doing from an application delivery standpoint. So with that said, I think we're going to run into the Q&A here. So Julie, you're still with me, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay. I think I have one that is super easy. Will you be sending out the slides post-webinar? The answer to that is yes, we can. We will PDF them and we'll send them out. We also have a couple call to actions here as well that we'll send you. Some were already mentioned here on the call. And then I do have one other question. If you have a question, it's at the bottom under Manage Q&A. Just go ahead and put in your new question. And Julie and I will do our best to answer those questions. So the one question I have, Julie, is a good one. So I think it'll be interesting to get your perspective and from an analyst standpoint, and then my perspective from sort of a vendor perspective. So the question is, how do you support staff to understand the new ways of working and the new tools and processes that organizations are implementing? So if you want to field that one first, Julie, go ahead, and then I'll just add on from yours.
Well, that sounds good, Tina. And, that's actually a great question, and it's one that I get on almost every webinar that I do on the topics of DevOps and continuous delivery. One thing I've found over the years in dealing with IT organizations, basically at all levels, from CIOs down, to those of us who have our hands on a lot of the code and a lot of the activities, is that you have to bear in mind that some new ideas that are being introduced into the IT enterprise involve cross-functional types of integrations. In other words, if just the server management team implements DevOps, or if only development initiates these types of processes, it really isn't going to work. And the reason being that these kinds of processes span silos. So for that reason, there has to be some sort of executive support. And these days, I'm sure, Tina, you found this as well. Most higher-level IT executives have heard about these concepts, understand something about them. But if there is someone on the staff who is very well-versed, maybe came from an organization that has already implemented these processes, it can be very successful to go in and talk with management and talk with them about some of the benefits, tell them where they can get more information. In other words, to try to garner executive support so that these things can be implemented cross silos.
Really great points, Julie. The executive support is so important, as well as really understanding, kind of what I was saying in my presentation about it's not just about the tool, it's not just about the process, and not just about the people who are, doing the actual work. It is a combination of all of that, and it's very important to really realize that. And try to come up with, perhaps fun ways to implement it, easy, clean understanding of how it's going to work. we see within our customer base when they begin implementing something like Jobs as Code, they take small projects. So they'll take a small application that they have, and they will, maybe they'll have a team of developers, maybe 10 developers, that'll start using the Jobs as Code approach. And then what we find is it kind of takes off from there. So you might think that it's really small and maybe insignificant, if you will, but then all of those developers say, oh my God, this is so great. I love using this, and it has helped me here, here, and here. And then what begins to happen is that internal, I call it the internal sales job, right? So the folks internally into the organization are now telling everybody else in the organization, hey, you're going to want to get your hands on this. And we actually see it take off pretty quick out of there as well. And it's not just the Jobs as Code approach that would do that. I think that's basically for anything. Start small, and then let it kind of organically grow through the organization through the other workers and the other developers and other operations teams across other applications as well. Any other questions? I'm looking at our thing. I think we are done with the questions here, but so what we'll do is we'll close out. If you have a question here in the next 30 seconds, go ahead and type it in, but I'll give my closing. Thank you very much to everyone for attending our call. On behalf of Julie and EMA and myself at BMC, we thank you for your time. We know it's, it takes a lot to actually sit on one of these webinars, but hopefully you've found this very educational. And again, moving forward, we are going to provide you a link in the response back for the impact report around the Jobs as Code from BMC that was done by Julie from EMA. And then we also will, suggest to you to go ahead and visit EMA for their research that Julie mentioned a little bit earlier. As well as you may feel free to visit the BMC website for more information as well at bmc.com/jobsascode, all one word. Thanks again for your time, and have a great evening.